A guy's running for president. Are we on now? Okay, very good. Good morning. That actually could be my whole talk, like when things just don't go right. What are you gonna do? All right. So with the topic of the day being law, but also being mindful that there is an activity that we're going to engage in where you have the opportunity to actually commit to paper your intentions for the year. Um, for me, the thing that kind of came through was this idea of the myth of law, but also the idea of a more perfect union. And I'm very mindful that we do live both in the world with secular law as well as spiritual law, and that there are ways in which we interact with the idea of law. And I'd like to kind of dig into that a little bit, hopefully to give you maybe a different way of thinking about declaring intention for this coming year. So as you know, I like to start with the Gospel according to Merriam-Webster because I find that the dictionary has a way of kind of leveling what we all might think, believe, and feel about any particular word or idea. So the definition of law, among the definitions, are these two pieces which I think are important. A binding custom or practice of a community. It doesn't say that it actually is good or bad. It just says that it's a binding custom or practice of a community. The second definition is a rule of conduct or action, a rule of conduct or action prescribed or formally recognized as binding or engorged by a controlling authority. So that whatever that understanding is, it's also understood that there is a controlling authority that sees to it that that understanding stays in place. Now, what's interesting is I want to share this with you, thinking about the law. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, not in order to create perfection, but in order to form a more perfect union. Establish justice. So at this time, in this speaking, in this declaring, we say that there is now justice in this union. Ensure domestic tranquility. That the purpose of the federal government is to ensure tranquility in the domestic region, not thinking about what's going on overseas, but here we are going to ensure the tranquility that exists within this area. We are going to provide for the common defense, the defense that takes care of all of us, that bears all of us in mind. Promote the general welfare. We're going to promote that there's general welfare so that everybody can participate in that, or if they need something, that's what we're trying to promote. And secure the blessings of liberty. Secure them. For those of you who are people who, boat and whatever that's called, tying stuff down, we're going to secure the blessings of liberty, secure them to ourselves and our posterity. So not just for us, but for everyone that comes after us, we are going to secure the blessings of liberty, that everyone, including us, going forward, shall experience freedom. And we do ordain, Now that's a word that I haven't heard since I was ordained. And really, when you're talking about someone or ordaining something, you are talking about infusing it with spiritual power. So we do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That is the preamble to our Constitution. How we doing? So some things we want to remember about that particular time in history, which was September 1787. Women were not equal to men. They were not seen as human beings equal to that of a man. Any person of color, pick a color, any person of color was considered a portion of a person, not even a whole person. And both women and people of color were considered to be the property of some man. Now, here's what's interesting about all of this, is that when we think about the preamble and think about the Constitution, we interact with the Constitution differently today than when it was written. And what we basically say is that those founding fathers did have some good things written down in there, and we are going to see to it as a society that what was written applies to everyone, no matter who they were talking about in 1787. There's this little thing called amendments, where you actually say, you know what, we didn't get that quite right. Let's add a little something to ensure the domestic tranquility. So there were only really two primary reasons for creating the Constitution, because remember, it was just kind of like a group of states that were all kind of like doing their own thing, and sometimes would get together when somebody came across the water and said, hey, we're going to take all your stuff. And then all the people said, hey, you're not. Let's all meet in Maryland. But there were only two primary reasons for creating the Constitution and actually establishing the United States: that there needed to be a federal government for the United States of America. We could no longer at that point operate as just independent states who periodically came together when stuff broke out. And we needed to delegate to the federal government certain limited and enumerated powers, so that the federal government would become the great equalizer. That what those powers are, all of the things that we would put in place to ensure domestic tranquility, to make sure that freedom would reign, blah, 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 all of that was going to be managed by the federal government. Regarding spiritual matters, though, it's a little bit different, because what we did in the United States was we kind of like got to a particular place and then said, in order for us to go forward, in order for us to be and fulfill on what we've said, we're going to have to create some new systems. Spiritual laws are a little bit different. Spiritual laws, or let me just say God, divine mind, whatever, however it is that you relate to that bigger presence, is. It is. It has been. It will be. But we write laws based on what we've witnessed, what spiritual guides, leaders, mystics, etc. have shared with us and said, this is the way the divine works. And we see that across all traditions. We see that with Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. With Jesus, Mary, Arjuna, Starfire, Ernest Holmes, Abraham, Karen Armstrong, Marianne Williamson, and you. you are also part of the mystics and sages and people saying, this is how the divine works in my life. So we actually write law about something that is, as opposed to the is telling us what law is. Does that make sense? They're kind of like is the divine, and then there's what we say about how the divine works, and then we say that it is law. Interesting how that's working. Because we're actually doing a little bit more of the declaring of what spiritual law is and is not. So the first myth that I want to talk about very quickly is that we generally tend to interact with the idea of law as if we only are working on being law-abiding. We look at law, whether it's spiritual or secular, from the lens of, am I actually abiding by the law? Or am I breaking the law? And we spend a lot of time looking to see which laws are we following, which ones are we breaking, do we kind of have a little righteousness about the laws that we're breaking, like, that law's not that important. I don't have to fully stop at that sign. Nobody's coming. It doesn't matter. I can just kind of slow down, but I don't have to stop. Nobody's coming, right? And so what's interesting, though, is that we don't necessarily think about the fact that we are actually writing and creating law, not just responding to laws that exist. So, an example, what are your laws about who you'll love? What's your law about money? How does money work for you? Yeah, I'll lend you some if I think you're going to pay me back. What are your laws about when someone asks for help? Of course I can help you if it's convenient for me. Sure. If we can do it in this time period. And if you could just get after I pray, could you just get healed real quick? Because I got to go to Whole Foods. You see, at this point in our spiritual development, this is no longer just about, am I being good? Am I keeping the laws that were in place that are written on a piece of paper, as much as being mindful of, I'm actually creating a bunch of laws at the same time about how I'm going to interact with everybody around me, even the divine. Yeah, I'll pray to you, but I want an answer right now. Yeah, I'll surrender, but if I surrender, what do I get? So we got all kinds of laws that we have, and maybe it's time in our spiritual development for us to maybe write some amendments to these laws that we've been creating about how we interact with one another. Or at the very least, look and see if the laws you're creating in your own life are in line with the spiritual laws that have at least been established at this point. And what's interesting is that depending on where you look on the internet, spiritual laws can either be 3, 7, 12, 37. It all depends on how you look at it. So, but pick something and take a look and see, how am I doing with that? And what am I creating that may actually be the antithesis of that? And maybe that's why things are not happening in my life the way I think they should be. Because there's the spiritual law, and then there's this thing that I'm doing over here on the side. So maybe 2018 is an opportunity for all of us to have a more perfect union with the divine. The second law, or second myth, I should say, is that laws or spiritual, whether they're spiritual or secular, will limit you in some way. that somehow the law is actually the limitation. So I want you to think back to what you released last week. For those of you who were here last week, what was the thing that you released from 2017? And consider this. First of all, for some of you, maybe for everybody, the thing you released came back Wednesday. You know, you released it, you took it to the fire, you threw it in the pit. For those of you listening to the tape, I'm dancing in the front of the church. Like, you know, you just did this whole ceremony and threw it into the fire. And Tuesday afternoon, what you surrendered unto the divine was right back there in full regalia. Did you release any people? Some of you may have released some bad habits. Some of you may have released some emotions. If you were releasing someone, did you release them in love? Or was the release, please remove this horrible, pestering presence from my otherwise peaceful existence? If you released any of your bad habits, did you release them with thanksgiving? Did you thank those bad habits for what they taught you? Or were you just kind of like, I just want to clean out my garage. I want to stop procrastinating. If you were releasing emotions, were you able to separate the emotion from the actual experience of the emotion? What would you do if you didn't have anger every now and again? Anger is actually a little bit of a barometer for commitment. You only get angry about stuff that you really care about on some level. Stuff that you don't really care about, you don't think about. And all of this, the laws that surround us, the things that guide us, that's the pathway, not the detour. So a little bit, maybe some of the things that you gave away were the detours and not the pathway to your actual spiritual development, your spiritual development, not what's nice and what looks good. Because, you know, there's a spiritual development where we all look good and we're floating around in purple light and touching one another and then we're all healed and there's all of that. And then there's the way the rest of us walk around the world. Like barely trying to get by and not like push the person over getting on the jitney. Like, could you just come on and get on? It's 4 degrees out here. The last point, and this takes us to the last myth, is that you're doing this all yourself. Whether you're releasing what didn't work from 2017 or creating your intention right now, we act like we're doing this all by ourselves. That none of it is done in full collaboration and witness of the divine. If it is indeed that God is omnipotent, omnipresent, all-knowing, there's nothing that happens in the absence of the divine, even the stuff that you would rather not be bothered with. All of that is happening in full witness of the divine. The question becomes, will you work with, will you partner yourself with the divine to actually co-create something? As opposed to more of the same, because really, you're either going to lose weight or you're not. Ask me how I know. You're either going to eat right and exercise or you're not. You're either going to save the amount of money that you said that you needed to save or you're not. That's kind of like, you know, not the best use of the power that holds the universe together. Like you could, you know, up your game a little bit. If we're talking about that, take that baby from underneath that tape. Yeah, no, get the baby. See, perfect example. Oh. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to like get this in time. So here's the thing. rather than this list that you're going to create of intentions, rather than it being your next iteration of superhuman qualities that you hope to have by December 31st, maybe consider what would God have of you this year. Instead of your intentions for this year being your laundry list of stuff to get or stuff that you don't want to be bothered with, what would it be like to live this year fully in service and presence to what God would have you do, or have you be, or have you accomplish, or have you fully surrender, such that it is not just no longer a burden to you, but that it actually serves humanity, that you no longer operate in a particular way. So with the sheet of paper that you have, what's going to happen is you're writing your intentions for 2018. You're going to then put that sheet of paper in the envelope, seal the envelope, and address the envelope to yourself. And at a particular time later in the year, we're going to send them back to you. But what I want you to really consider right now, what would God have you do? What would God have you be? What would God have you surrender this year? And make that your intention. Who are you going to be? And I know it's frightening because I get my own messages that I'm kind of like, I'm not doing that. I don't feel like doing that. That's not fun. But what can you co-create with the divine this year? Because you're not doing it by yourself. And not for nothing, it doesn't just serve you if you accomplish it. Everyone and everything around you will reverberate with that energy as you're working on it. So take a couple of minutes. Let's get that written down. Keelan, could you play something?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Something soft. Here, give me the baby.
I got it.
You got it? Well, I just want to hold the baby.
I got it.
No, I want to hold the baby.
I want to play with her.
Well, I want to hold her.
Give her a little hold.
Hey, how are you?
Look at her.
Thank you. So what we'd like to do now, as you're completing, is ask those who are coming to do the offering to come forward now. We'll have the prayer for the offering, and if you could put your intentions in the basket with your offering, then we'll just take all of that at the same time.
And your pens and your litter and everything can go in the basket.
You put everything in the basket as it's coming around. Yes, sir. Say again. If you're sure you're going to get it back.
We'll take care of that.